Okay, so this question, which I've kind of adapted for the one in the Hodder book, is about the Native Americans on the plains and whether their lifestyle changed in the years 1865 to 1890. So for this period, we're looking at kind of the Reconstruction era and the Gilded Age. All right. So we put this together as a bit of a class. So myself and the students, and this is what we kind of came up with. Okay, so in terms of the introduction, we felt that it was important to define the word lifestyle and just make it clear how Native Americans lived. So this nomadic lifestyle, the role of the buffalo, and the freedom. We thought that was important to get that definition at the start so we could look back at it in the conclusion. We looked at a couple of brief examples of historians. D. Brown's Bury My Heart, Wounded Knee tells how Native Americans lost their lands, lives and liberty to white American settlers. And it's followed by Francis Jennings there, who challenged the original view of a civilizing mission, just sees it basically material interest and naked expansion. And whereas both those are not necessarily talking in that sense about change, I think that they would both agree that the lifestyle was significantly changed in this period. But is it as simple as that? That's the kind of how we were going to look at it. Is it as simple as that? Certainly, at first it seems that's the case, but do we need to look more closely? So on the section about the lifestyle changing, we thought about the Homestead Acts and the various acts, Timber and Culture Act, Desert and Land Act, offering up acres of land and how that kind of basically sold, in inverting commas, land in the West to Americans, or gave them land, and obviously that then remove that land from the Native Americans. The fact that by 1880 there's 3,000 bonanza farms of over 1,000 acres shows that actually a lot of land had been taken away from the Native Americans by that, and that would obviously cause their lifestyle to change. Added to this is the reservation policy then, the idea of, if you like, rounding up Native Americans and putting them into certain areas, certain reservations. Okay, the idea of the government was to Americanize these Native Americans, considered to be savages. Basically, get rid of the dependence on hunting on buffalo, get rid of their tribal way of life by removing their dependence on the buffalo, and basically educating them and converting them to Christianity. And obviously, their extreme reservation life was extremely harsh. Didn't really realise because the land that they're given doesn't really work as farmland. So you can see there that the attempts to really transform, transform the Native Americans with the reservation policy. Obviously, adding to this, the Great Sioux War of 1876 is an example of the American government basically deciding, well, actually, the gold's been found in the Black Hills. We need to move the Sioux out because that's no longer acceptable to us. They don't want to go. And there's a couple of setbacks, such as the Battle of Little Bighorn, but basically, the US Army removes the Sioux from the Black Hills, and that gives you an example of the fact that even though a deal was offered, $6 million, the idea is that the Native Americans have been unreasonable and they've got to go. And again, that shows that ultimately that the lifestyle is going to change, because even the reservations that have been put on, they're no longer allowed to stay on. And yeah, that's kind of a development of that. And as we move then into the kind of Gilded Age, then we can see that there's a significant attempt to integrate Native Americans into the American way of life, this idea of Americanization. By 1899, $2.5 million has been spent on day schools and boarding schools for 20,000 Native American children to try and educate them and make them, if you will, in inverting commas, American. All right, and the climax of that policy is the Dawes Act. Okay, and this aimed a bit like the Homestead Acts, but to break up the reservations into small plots of land and give them to families. So the idea was that each family could receive 160 acres of farmland or 320 acres of grazing land, and basically divide up the reservations into property like the kind of rest of America. Okay. Now we can obviously look at the aim of the Dawes Act and whether that means it needs criticising or not, but that's not really the issue. I think the idea is, the aim of it was to actually remove the tribalism of the Native Americans, and therefore it really is aimed at changing their lifestyle. I guess you could argue about the success of it and whether that means that actually the lifestyle of the Americans didn't change, but I think the intention was there, and by divvying up the land in this way was to try and make sure that Native Americans were different, or no longer different, according to the Americans. So yeah, by 1900, there was only about 100,000 of the 240,000 Native Americans that were there in 1865 left on the plains. You can see there, that's a massive change. Now, whether that's that they've died off or been moved on, you can see that there's a massive change there on those figures. And perhaps is there a change in attitude as well? Neither side really wanted violence at the Battle of Wounded Knee, but they had earlier. So maybe the attitude towards Native Americans, I think, is changing. I think that in the Gilded Age there's an attempt to try and, even if it's just for show, to try and integrate the Native Americans into the kind of American way of life. But how successful that was, I don't know. What I would say is that when I looked at this, is that initially when you look at this question, you're thinking, yes, their lifestyle did change, okay, definitely. But actually, what we now need to do is to maybe look a little bit closer and see, because when you first think of this question, you think it's going to be a one-side answer, the lifestyle change, but is that a reality? Let's have a look. So, looking at the lifestyle did not change. In 1865, Americans were happy to leave Native Americans on a land that white Americans didn't want. So they could stay there as long as it was land that they didn't want. And we also thought we could add the initial reaction of the Native Americans to the reservation policy. They were supposed to be on reservation by the 31st of January 1876, but many of them either didn't hear about it or chose to ignore it. So certainly in the short term, their lifestyle did not change. Towards the end of the period, we get Buffalo Bill and other Native American performers. And I guess while they're performing, their lifestyles change, but they are still able to honour some of the traditions of their lifestyle. So I guess in some ways that's the same. One of the students in the class thought that the violence was consistent throughout the period. There's a Sand Creek massacre in 1864, and there's also the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890, which had a book ending. And he said that this didn't change during the period. It seems to me to be a good point. And in the build-up to the Battle of Wounded Knee, we've got this idea that shows that Native Americans never really conformed to Americanization. The teaching of, and I don't know how you pronounce it, okay, and the spiritual dance spreading and being part of the cause of this kind of ghost dance, being part of the cause of the Battle of Wounded Knee, shows that actually in many Native Americans' lifestyle maybe hadn't changed. Maybe some of the practicalities had, some of the physical things, but mentally their attitude to their own lifestyle hadn't changed. So we began thinking about our conclusion, and we thought we needed to link to the introduction to those themes that we mentioned about lifestyle, about freedom, about buffalo, about nomadic lifestyle, and had that changed? And we felt that it had. One idea was to say that it changed in the early Reconstruction period quite significantly, but then it kind of stayed the same in the Gilded Age, and that's certainly a good thing to think about because it's splitting the period up rather than just giving one blanket answers. We suggested maybe the attitude on both sides stayed the same. We suggested that maybe there's a change in the nature of discrimination towards the end of the period, when Native Americans treated more like African Americans. But they were still discriminated throughout, but the nature of that had changed. And did that affect their lifestyles? I think what we'd say with this is at first it seems, when you look at this question, that yes, it changed completely. Things that jump out at us when we look at the period that we've mentioned really make that point, that you look at it and you're thinking, crikey, Native American life did change. Reservation policy and all those things associated with it did make a change. But when you look more closely, you see that there are actually some good examples of things staying the same. Maybe the attitude, the situation, the view of each other from both sides maybe stayed the same. However, when I look overall, I do have to think that it did change. I think the reservation policy did change the situation for Native Americans. I think that has to be perhaps the conclusion. But again, you might want to use the kind of structure here to it. You might want to look instead at the different time periods, and you might want to think about the nature of discrimination that we talked about there. So they're the three things that we picked up for our conclusion.